Hello there. I'm glad you made it in tonight. You can listen closely, or let the story drift and settle in the corners of the room. Before we begin, just a small note. This episode was made for rest. Dim visuals, slow movement, a quiet voice. Nothing here is meant to pull you awake. You're welcome to leave a note with where you're listening from, if you like. If these slow stories help, you can subscribe to let us know. Now, let's begin. Chapter 1. Before the Sun. Uruk wakes. Before anyone writes the laws, before the priests light the morning incense, before the kings speak in the names of gods, there is only mud, darkness, and the sound of water moving through reeds. Uruk wakes slowly. The river comes first. You hear it before you see it. Irrigation water slipping through narrow canals. Reeds brushing together in the wind. The soft knock of a loose boat against its post. The smell of wet earth hangs low over the riverbank, thick enough to taste. Mud grips at sandals. Tools left outside overnight shine faintly with dew. Above the city, the sky is still black. Only at the far edge of the horizon does a thin grey-blue line begin to form. This is the hour Ilushu likes best. He stands outside the temple storehouse, holding a clay tablet against his chest for warmth. The tablet is still damp from yesterday's work, and his thumb has already smudged one corner. He is young for a scribe. Too young, some of the older priests say, to be trusted with temple records. But Ilushu learns quickly. He remembers numbers. He keeps his head lowered. Most importantly, he knows when not to speak. A torch cracks nearby. One of the temple guards mutters a curse as the flame bends sideways in the wind. Beyond him, laborers gather beside the canal gate, shoulders wrapped in rough wool cloaks, still carrying the smell of smoke from last night's fires. Nobody speaks loudly before sunrise. Not here. Not on mornings when the priests climb the Ziggurat before dawn. Ilushu watches them now. White linen shifts in the dark as the procession forms near the temple stairs. Bare feet press against cold stone. One priest carries a bowl of barley. Another holds a jar of oil sealed with wax. The oldest among them walks empty-handed, lips moving silently through prayers he has repeated for so many years. They no longer seem connected to words. The ziggurat rises above everything. Even in darkness, it dominates the city. Layer upon layer of mud brick climbs into the fading night sky, its edges softened by windblown dust and years of repair. Children born beneath its shadow grow up believing it has always existed. Ilushu knows better. Part of his work is repairing broken records in the temple archives. He has seen older tablets mentioning smaller shrines buried beneath the foundations, temples beneath temples, cities beneath cities. Nothing here is truly permanent. Not even the gods. That thought arrives suddenly, unwanted. He pushes it away at once. A scribe who thinks too freely does not remain a scribe for long. Nearby, a woman kneels beside the canal, washing mud from baskets woven out of split reeds. Her son sits beside her, shaping little boats from scraps of clay. One slips from his fingers into the water and spins away into the dark. The boy watches silently as the canal carries it off. Nobody tries to stop it. The priests begin climbing. One by one, their lamps drift upward through the darkness like small floating stars. The city watches them in silence. Even the dogs seem quieter now. Ilushu feels it too. That strange pressure that settles over Uruk before dawn. As though the city itself is waiting to discover whether the world will continue. The old stories say the gods brought order to the river plains. They separated water from land, named the stars, measured the seasons, taught humans how to shape mud into walls strong enough to survive the floods. But standing here in the cold, watching torchlight tremble in the wind, Ilushu is not sure order feels divine. It feels fragile. A canal wall collapses if no one repairs it. Grain rots if someone forgets the storeroom seals. A king's decree disappears if the tablet breaks before drying. Civilization, he thinks, may simply be the art of preventing everything from returning to mud. Above him, the first prayer finally rises from the Ziggurat. Not loud, not dramatic, just a low human voice carried by the wind across sleeping rooftops. A name follows it. Enlil. The syllables drift out over the river. Around him, workers lower their heads. Someone touches 2 fingers to their chest. Someone else whispers the name again under their breath, as if repeating it might keep the floodwaters back for another day. Ilushu does not join them. Instead, he presses his thumb into the edge of the damp clay tablet he carries, leaving behind a small mark no larger than a fingernail. Proof that he was here. Proof that someone saw this morning happen. Far beyond the canals, dawn finally begins to touch the reeds. Uruk exhales, and the city starts another day. Chapter 2. The Ziggurat's Shadow. By sunrise, the city already belongs to the priests. The streets below the Ziggurat fill with movement. Laborers carrying baskets of reeds. Merchants dragging open wooden shutters. Children sent to fetch water before the heat arrives. Smoke rises from cook fires in thin grey lines, drifting between the mud brick homes. But above all of it, the Ziggurat casts its shadow across the city. Long, cold, heavy enough to feel. Ilushu climbs the lower steps carefully, one hand pressed against the tablet tucked beneath his robe. The bricks are damp from dew, soft in places where last season's rains wore away the corners. Temple workers kneel nearby, patching cracks with fresh mud, their fingers moving automatically, as though the building repairs itself through them. A priest once told Ilushu, the Ziggurat was the center of the world. Another claimed it was a ladder for the gods. To Ilushu, it mostly feels like work. Every year, new bricks are added. Every year, old ones crumble. Nothing sacred stays standing without constant repair. Halfway up the stairs, the smell changes. Below the temple platform, the city smells of fish, smoke, wet wool, and crowded bodies. Here, the air carries incense and cedar oil. Resin burns slowly in bronze bowls, releasing a bitter sweetness that clings to the throat. The priests breathe it daily. Most develop coughs by winter. Nobody mentions this during rituals. At the top platform, offerings are already being arranged. Dates, barley cakes, honey sealed in little clay jars. A goat liver rests on a linen cloth, awaiting inspection for omens. The oldest priest, Nabatum, kneels beside the altar, muttering calculations under his breath. His fingers tremble slightly as he lines up bowls with precise care. Ilushu notices the shaking because he notices everything. That is what makes him useful and dangerous. Late, Nabatum says without looking up. Ilushu lowers his head. The southern storeroom seal broke during the night. Everything breaks during the night. The old priest says it casually, but the words linger. Nearby, another priest lights fresh incense. Smoke curls sideways in the morning wind instead of rising cleanly upward. Several priests glance at one another. Bad sign. Nobody says it aloud. The gods are listening most carefully when people pretend not to notice. Ilushu kneels beside the record table and unrolls a strip of linen containing yesterday's tablets. Grain tallies, labor counts, flood measurements from the lower canal. He begins reading quietly while Nabatum presses the temple seal into wet clay. One mark after another. The seal leaves behind the same image every time. A horned crown, flowing water, a star above a doorway. The symbols are older than the city itself. Sometimes Ilushu wonders whether anyone remembers what they originally meant. Below the temple walls, a sudden argument breaks out in the street. Two merchants shouting over a damaged grain shipment. Their voices rise sharply through the morning air before temple guards force them apart. Nabatum sighs. People grow louder every year. You think the gods dislike noise? Ilushu asks carefully. No, the old priest replies. I think they dislike confidence. The answer stays with him, because confidence is everywhere now. Uruk's walls grow taller each season. The markets spread farther along the canals. New laws appear faster than scribes can copy them. Even the kings speak as though the city will last forever. But every morning the river still presses against its banks. Waiting, Ilushu finishes the final tally and sets aside the stylus. For a moment, the wind dies completely. The incense smoke rises straight upward. Every priest on the platform freezes. Even Nabatum stops breathing. Then, from somewhere beyond the eastern canal, thunder rolls across the plain. Distant, but unmistakable. The younger priests exchange nervous glances. One quietly touches the amulet hanging beneath his robe. Nabatum merely presses another seal into clay. The river will rise early this year, he says. How can you tell? The old priest looks toward the dark horizon beyond the reeds. Because the gods always warn us, he says softly. And because we never listen the first time. Below them, Uruk continues waking. Merchants reopen negotiations. Children run through narrow alleys. Dogs bark beside the canal gates. Life resumes quickly after fear passes. But Ilushu notices something others do not. Several temple birds have gone silent. The small white cranes that usually gather near the upper pools are gone entirely. He looks toward the river again. The water appears calm. Too calm. Under the growing daylight, the city stretches wide beneath the Ziggurat's shadow, certain of its strength, proud of its walls, busy naming itself eternal. And somewhere deep beneath the sound of morning prayers and market voices, the river keeps moving. Chapter 3. Naming the Gods. Law and Storm. The first storm of the season arrives without rain. All morning, the wind moves strangely through Uruk. Canal water ripples against its usual direction. Market awnings snap hard enough to tear loose from their poles. Dust spirals through the streets in little twisting columns before vanishing again. By midday, everyone is speaking more quietly. Even the animals seem uneasy. Inside the temple archive, Ilushu presses fresh clay flat against a reed mat while trying not to think about the sky. The archive room is cool and dim, its walls lined with shelves of drying tablets. Some contain grain records. Others hold contracts, prayers, marriage agreements, flood levels, tax disputes, and inventories of temple livestock. Thousands of lives pressed into mud. Thousands of attempts to make chaos obey rules. Ilushu works beside an older scribe named Eridu, whose hands shake badly whenever thunder approaches. You hear it? Eridu asks suddenly. Ilushu pauses. At first he hears only the scratching of styluses and the crackle of oil lamps. Then, a low sound, far away. Not thunder exactly, more like stone shifting underground. Eridu mutters a prayer under his breath. To Enlil, Ilushu asks. To whichever god still listens. The old scribe spits into the dust beside his stool afterward, as though ashamed of his own honesty. Ilushu lowers his eyes and returns to work. Today's tablet concerns new grain taxes along the southern canals. A merchant family accused another of hiding barley during the last flood season. The king's officials want harsher penalties written into law. Ilushu copies the decree carefully. The punishment line is longer than the original accusation. That feels important somehow. At the top of the tablet, he presses the name, Enlil, Lord of Wind, Lord of Decrees, Lord of Storms. The wedges sink deep into wet clay. Every law begins with a god's name now. That is how authority survives. A king may die. A priest may lie. A city wall may collapse, but if a rule belongs to a god, people obey it even when afraid, especially when afraid. Outside, the wind grows louder. Dust slips beneath the archive door in thin brown streams. Somewhere in the city, pottery shatters. Nobody stops writing. That is the strange thing about civilization, Ilushu thinks. Even while the world threatens to come apart, someone must continue recording grain totals. A temple runner bursts into the archive, suddenly, breathless and pale. The western gate collapsed. Several scribes look up at once. From the storm? Eridu asks. There is no storm yet. Silence settles heavily across the room. That is worse. The runner wipes sweat from his forehead. The priests want all flood records brought to the upper temple. At once, the archive erupts into motion. Tablets wrapped in linen. Shelves emptied. Names stacked on top of names. Ilushu gathers armfuls of records, while Eridu mutters angrily under his breath. All this for wind. It may become more than wind, Ilushu says. Eridu stops suddenly. His expression changes. Not fear. Recognition. That, the old scribe whispers, is exactly how floods begin. By late afternoon, the sky over Uruk has turned the color of bruised copper. The city grows dim beneath blowing dust. People tie cloth across their mouths. Merchants nail shutters closed. Temple bells ring from the ziggurat above. Not an alarm. A warning. The priests stand along the upper stairs, scattering incense into the wind, though most of it blows back into their faces. Below, the crowds gather anyway. Fear always gathers publicly. Ilushu carries tablets upward toward the temple vaults when he notices something strange near the lower canal. The river has stopped reflecting light. Even under the storm-dark sky, water should shimmer. Now it looks flat, black, still, as if waiting. Beside him, Nabatam appears quietly from the smoke and dust. The river remembers, the old priest says. Ilushu frowns. Remembers what? Nabatam watches the dark water below the city walls. That humans always mistake survival for control. The wind rises sharply then, carrying reeds and dust through the streets. Somewhere above them, thunder finally breaks across the sky. The sound rolls over Uruk like stone dragged across the heavens themselves. Below the ziggurat, people begin speaking the gods' names aloud. Enlil, Inanna, Enki, one after another, as if naming something might make it merciful. Ilushu grips the damp clay tablets tighter against his chest, because for the first time, he understands something the older scribes never say directly. The records are not preserving the city. They are preserving evidence that the city once existed at all. Chapter 4. Enki's Canal. The flood does not arrive all at once. That is what surprises Ilushu most. No towering wave. No single moment when the city understands disaster has begun. Instead, water simply starts appearing where it should not. A narrow stream slips beneath a canal gate before dawn. By morning, mud walls sweat moisture from their cracks. Water gathers in shallow footprints across the market road, reflecting pale strips of sky. By midday, the lower fields are gone. Nobody says the word flood yet. People prefer smaller words at first. Overflow, leak, bad season, temporary. The canal workers are already awake when Ilushu reaches the southern embankment. Men and women stand knee-deep in mud, hammering sharpened reeds into the soft banks, while overseers shout measurements over the wind. The smell here is sharp and green. Fresh cut reeds, river silt, wet clay churned under hundreds of feet. Torch smoke drifts low over the water, even in daylight. One worker slips and disappears waist deep into the canal to a chorus of exhausted laughter. Nobody laughs very hard anymore. At the center of the embankment stands Bellasir, chief engineer of the southern canals. He looks less like a scholar and more like a tired fisherman. His wool robe is soaked dark from the knees down, and his hands are stained permanently brown from years of mud and river work. Too fast, he mutters, while staring into the water. Ilushu steps carefully across a plank bridge. The current, the river. Bellasir kneels beside a wooden sluice gate and presses 2 fingers against the vibrating wood. She's pushing harder than last year. Ilushu notices the engineer says she. Nobody corrects him. The river has moods now, personalities, tempers. That happens when people live beside water long enough. Nearby, a small shrine to Enki leans crookedly beside the canal wall. Someone has left offerings there overnight. Honey, dried fish, a tiny clay boat no larger than a hand. Lord Enki, keeper of clever things. Lord of water. Lord of solutions that become new problems. The workers mutter his name constantly while repairing the canals. Not prayers exactly, more like negotiations. Keep the wall standing. Slow the current. Take the eastern fields if you must, but leave the grain stores dry. Bellasir spits into the mud. The priests think incense controls rivers. You disagree? I think rivers prefer engineering. A moment later, the canal wall groans loudly beside them. Both men step back instinctively. Water leaks through the reeds in thin, dark threads. Bellasir closes his eyes briefly. More workers, he says. There are none left. Then pull them from the temple kitchens. The priests won't allow it. Another groan cuts through the embankment. Longer this time. Bellasir gives a tired smile. The river will. By afternoon, the city begins changing shape. People carry furniture to rooftops. Children are ordered indoors. Temple guards move grain supplies uphill toward the Ziggurat. Along the western street, arguments break out over water rights and canal access. Whose field floods first matters. whose field floods last matters more. Ilushu walks through all of it, carrying tablets beneath his robe, recording losses as quickly as the numbers arrive. 4 sheep drowned. 2 storage walls collapsed. 3 southern homes abandoned. The lists grow faster than he can write them. At sunset, he reaches the upper temple exhausted. The priests have begun new rituals already. 7 bowls of river water arranged around the altar, incense burned every hour, a ceremonial hymn repeated until voices crack from dryness. Nabatum watches the rituals quietly from the stairs. Do they help? Ilushu asks. The old priest considers the question honestly. They help the priests feel useful. Below them, thunder moves again across the horizon. The lower districts of Uruk glisten beneath rising water. Torchlight reflects off flooded streets in trembling gold lines. For a moment, the city almost looks beautiful. That feels unfair somehow. Near the temple gate, a child kneels beside a puddle floating scraps of clay like tiny boats. Where do they go? She asks Ilushu. The boats? The stories. He looks toward the dark river beyond the walls. I think, he says carefully, they go wherever the water remembers them. The child seems satisfied with this answer. Children usually are. Night settles slowly across Uruk. Along the canals, workers continue hammering reeds into soft earth by torchlight. The city refuses sleep. Somewhere in the dark, another embankment collapses with a distant rushing sound, followed by shouting. Ilushu hears it even from the temple stairs. Beside him, Nabatum closes his eyes. Enki always teaches the same lesson, the old priest murmurs. What lesson? That humans borrow order. The river keeps rising beneath them, and below the sound of prayers, hammers, and frightened voices, Uruk begins understanding that walls are only promises made from mud. Chapter 5. Kings and Clay. The king arrives at the temple after sunrise, sweating beneath layers of ceremonial wool. 2 servants hold the edges of his robe above the mud, while he climbs the Ziggurat stairs with visible effort. Gold discs sewn into the fabric clink softly with each step. His sandals are already ruined. Ilushu watches from beside the archive doorway. This is his first time seeing the king up close. He expected someone larger, someone harder. Instead, King Lugal-An looks exhausted. There are dark circles beneath his eyes, and when he pauses halfway up the stairs, one of the priests pretends not to notice him catching his breath. Power, Ilushu realizes, breathes heavily. Below the temple platform, Uruk churns with nervous movement. Flood water still crowds the lower districts. Canal workers shout across broken embankments. Merchants argue over grain prices rising by the hour. And somewhere beyond the eastern plain, Kish has begun moving soldiers toward the river crossings. Disaster attracts rivals. The king reaches the upper platform at last. Priests bow. Scribes kneel. Temple singers begin a hymn that sounds older than the city itself. Lugalain barely listens. His attention stays fixed on the flood map spread across the stone table near the altar. How much grain remains dry? He asks. No greeting, no prayer, only numbers. A temple accountant clears his throat nervously. If the lower granaries fail, perhaps 3 months. Perhaps the western stores were damaged overnight. The king presses fingers against his forehead. And Kish knows this already. Nobody answers. Because of course Kish knows. Cities leak information as easily as water. Nabatum steps forward carefully. The people need reassurance. The people need walls, the king replies. Several priests exchange uncomfortable glances. That is not the sort of thing kings are supposed to say aloud. Rulers speak of gods, of destiny, of divine favor. Not repairs, not shortages, not fear. But Ilushu notices something strange. The king no longer sounds like someone trying to impress the gods. He sounds like a man trying to hold back collapse with arithmetic. A servant brings forward the ceremonial crown. Gold leaf over woven leather. Beautiful from a distance. Up close, Ilushu notices cracks along the edges where the gold has begun peeling away. Lugalain places it on his head reluctantly. Too quickly. Slightly crooked. No one dares adjust it. The morning ritual begins. Priests burn incense. Temple singers chant blessings over the city. A sacred bowl of river water is lifted toward the sky, while prayers to Enlil rise over the flooded streets below. And through all of it, Ilushu keeps writing. Every decree, every grain measure, every order sent toward the canals. The stylus moves constantly, because once words enter clay, they become harder to deny. At least that is what scribes tell themselves. Halfway through the ceremony, shouting erupts below the Ziggurat. A crowd gathers near the southern stair. Temple guards move quickly. Too slowly. A woman breaks through them carrying a child soaked from the river districts. He's sick, she shouts toward the priests. Nobody moves immediately. The ceremony cannot stop once begun. The king watches from above. The child coughs weakly against his mother's shoulder. Water drips onto the temple stones. One priest whispers angrily that the lower districts should have remained sealed. Another says this is exactly why the gods are displeased. The mother keeps shouting. Then suddenly, Lugalain steps down from the platform himself. The singing stops. So do the priests. Even the wind seems quieter for a moment. The king kneels beside the child. Not dramatically, not heroically, just awkwardly, like a man uncertain what kings are supposed to do with suffering once it stands directly in front of them. The boy cannot be older than 5. Fever burns in his face. Lugalain touches the child's forehead, then looks toward the temple physicians. Help him. The command comes softly, but the silence afterward feels enormous, because kings are supposed to protect cities, not individuals. That distinction matters. Ilushu writes the moment down carefully, then hesitates. Will this remain in the official record? Will the priests allow it? Will the king? History, he realizes, is often decided by whichever detail survives copying. Above them, thunder rolls again across the distant plain. The mother weeps quietly while physicians carry the child inside. The ceremony never fully recovers afterward. The prayers sound thinner. The incense smoke drifts unevenly. Even the priests seem distracted. Only Nabatum appears unsurprised. The gods weaken first in the imagination. The old priest murmurs beside Ilushu. What does that mean? It means people stop fearing them. Below the temple, Uruk stretches wide beneath gathering clouds. Flood water glitters through the lower streets. Smoke rises from crowded rooftops. Canal workers still struggle against collapsing embankments. And somewhere beyond the horizon, rival cities wait for weakness. The king removes his crown before the ceremony officially ends. No one mentions it, but Ilushu watches carefully as Lugal Ong sets it down beside the unfinished flood reports. Gold beside mud, authority beside water, both more fragile than they appear. Chapter 6. The Rival City. 3 days after the floodwaters reach the lower markets, riders from Kish appear on the northern road. They arrive at dawn beneath pale skies. Their donkeys splashed with mud up to the knees. No banners fly above them. No armor glitters in the morning light. That is what makes everyone nervous. Armies announce themselves. Warnings arrive quietly. Ilushu sees them from the upper gate, while helping temple workers carry tablets into a dry storeroom. The riders move slowly through the waking city, eyes lingering on damaged canal walls, collapsed roofs, and water stains creeping halfway up the mud brick homes. They are counting weaknesses. Everyone understands this immediately. Children stop playing in the streets. Merchants lower their voices. Even the dogs bark differently. One rider carries gifts balanced across his saddle. Dyed wool, honey sealed in clay, a bronze knife wrapped in linen. The other carries the tablet. That matters more. By mid-morning, the envoys stand inside the council chamber, beneath painted images of the gods. The room smells of damp wool and old incense. Rainwater still drips steadily from a crack in the ceiling into a bronze bowl someone forgot to move. Nobody acknowledges it. King Lugal Ane sits at the head of the table wearing simpler robes today. No crown, no ceremony, just exhaustion hidden beneath careful posture. Ilushu kneels near the wall with the other scribes, stylus ready. The envoy from Kish bows politely. "Great Uruk," he says. "Not my king, not lord of cities, only Uruk." Every word here has edges. The gifts are placed carefully before the council. Honey, bronze, dyed cloth, and finally, the clay tablet. Heavy, dark, perfectly fired. Kish still has dry kilns. The envoy lets the silence stretch before speaking again. Our king offers prayers for your flooding. Lugalain nods once. How generous. Another pause. Then the envoy smiles. Too politely. Kish also offers assistance securing the eastern grain routes during this difficult season. There it is. Not invasion. Not yet. Dependence. Control arrives more cheaply when disguised as help. Several priests whisper quietly among themselves. The flood has weakened Uruk badly enough that some may actually consider the offer. Ilushu watches Nabatum instead. The old priest stares only at the envoy's sandals, studying the mud, studying where they have travelled, studying what remains unsaid. What does Kish request in return? The king asks. The envoy folds his hands. Only friendship between neighbouring cities. No one in the room believes him. Outside the chamber, thunder rumbles faintly over the plains. The envoy continues smoothly. Shared guards along the grain roads. Temporary oversight of river trade. Joint taxation until the flood season passes. Joint taxation. Ilushu feels several scribes stiffen beside him. That is not friendship. That is surrender, written politely. Lugalain says nothing for a long moment. Water drips steadily into the bronze bowl. Plink, plink, plink. Finally, the king leans back slowly. When Kish flooded 3 summers ago, he says, Uruk sent grain without asking for taxes. The envoy's smile fades slightly. Kish remembers your generosity. I wonder if Kish remembers its debts as clearly. Silence settles across the chamber. Outside, wind rattles the temple shutters. The envoy lowers his eyes respectfully, but only for a moment. The world changes, he says softly. That sentence lingers heavily in the room because everyone knows it is true. Cities rise. Cities weaken. Gods lose followers. Floods redraw borders more effectively than armies. Nothing remains fixed long enough to trust completely. Not even Uruk. The negotiations continue for hours. Trade routes, canal access, military escorts, grain reserves. Every agreement wrapped inside 3 hidden threats. Ilushu records it all carefully while realizing something uncomfortable. Most wars probably begin sounding exactly like this. Quiet voices, polite smiles, carefully chosen words drying slowly into clay. By dusk, the envoys depart without agreement. That should feel like victory. It does not. The city watches silently as the riders disappear back toward Kish beneath darkening skies. Only after they vanish does conversation fully return to the streets. Rumors spread immediately. Kish prepares soldiers. The king plans surrender. The priests saw bad omens. The flood is punishment. The flood is opportunity. The flood is only the beginning. Fear multiplies faster than truth. That evening, Ilushu walks the canal roads alone. Workers still repair embankments by torchlight, while frogs croak loudly from flooded fields beyond the walls. The river has begun falling slightly. Not enough, but enough for people to notice. Near the southern gate, children sing mocking songs about Kish, while throwing reeds into the water like tiny spears. Adults pretend not to hear them. Above the city, smoke drifts from the Ziggurat into gathering clouds. Nabatum stands waiting near the temple stairs when Ilushu returns. "You listened carefully today," the old priest says. "Yes." "What did you learn?" Ilushu thinks for a moment. That cities lie politely. For the first time in days, Nabatum almost smiles. "Good," he says softly. "You are beginning to hear history properly." Behind them, thunder moves again across the plain, far away, closer than before. Chapter 7. Flood and Memory. The rain begins after midnight. Not heavy at first, just a thin tapping sound against rooftops and canal water, soft enough that most of Uruk tries to ignore it. By dawn, the lower districts are underwater. Ilushu wakes to shouting. The sound reaches even the upper temple chambers. Voices echoing through narrow streets. Animals crying somewhere below. The deep groan of wood breaking under pressure. He sits upright instantly. Water drips from the ceiling beside his reed mat. Cold air rushes through the doorway, carrying the smell of river mud and panic. Outside, priests hurry across the Ziggurat courtyard, clutching robes above their ankles. Rain lashes sideways in the wind. Oil lamps flicker weakly against the storm-dark morning. Below the temple, Uruk is disappearing. Canals have overflowed entirely now. Water rushes through the market streets, carrying baskets, broken planks, reeds, and pieces of collapsed walls. Entire homes lean sideways where foundations dissolved overnight. People move uphill in silent lines. Whatever they can carry hangs from their shoulders. Children, bundles of grain, clay idols wrapped in cloth. The city's poor always travel lightly during disaster. They own only what they can lift. Ilushu grips the temple railing tightly while staring downward. The river no longer looks like water. It looks alive. A moving brown force pressing itself through every weakness the city ever tried to hide. Beside him, Nabatum watches without expression. "It has happened before," the old priest says. Ilushu looks toward him sharply. The records never describe this. The records survive by omission. That answer feels cruel. Perhaps true. Temple bells begin sounding across the city. Not ceremony now. Warning. The lower archive chambers flood first. Ilushu reaches them knee-deep in water, alongside several younger scribes, already struggling to rescue tablets from collapsing shelves. Wet clay breaks apart easily. Names dissolve first. Then numbers. Then laws. Within minutes, entire years of records begin sliding back into mud. Carry the kiln-fired tablets first, someone shouts. Leave the grain counts. No, the temple debts. Take the king's decrees. Everyone suddenly believes their own category of history matters most. Ilushu wades toward the rear shelves where older tablets are stored. Water pushes hard against his legs now. Floating oil lamps spin slowly through the room like dying stars. A shelf collapses nearby with a loud crack. Tablets burst apart underwater. 300 years of agreements disappear in seconds. He should feel horror. Instead, he feels something stranger. Relief. As though the city's endless need to record itself has finally met something larger than memory. Then he sees it. The hidden tablet. The one describing the night Inanna wept blood. Still wrapped beneath a shelf beam where he hid it weeks ago. Without thinking, Ilushu grabs it and shoves it beneath his robe. Water rises to his waist. Above him, thunder shakes the ceiling stones. Leave the rest, Nabatum shouts from the stairwell. The upper chamber is flooding. They abandon the archive together. Behind them, the room disappears slowly beneath dark river water. The temple stairs overflow with refugees by midday. Families huddle beneath awnings while priests distribute watered barley from cracked storage jars. Children sleep wrapped in damp cloth beside sacred statues. Nobody cares about ritual purity anymore. The gods stand shoulder to shoulder with soaked laborers and coughing fishermen. Disaster flattens hierarchy quickly. Outside the temple walls, Uruk dissolves. Market stalls drift through the streets. Dead goats float beside broken furniture. A section of the southern wall collapses entirely near sunset, with a sound like distant thunder. No one even reacts. People are too exhausted now. The rain finally weakens near evening. The city falls quiet beneath grey skies and rising mist. Only the river keeps speaking. Ilushu sits beside the upper courtyard, wrapped in wet wool, clutching the hidden tablet beneath his robe for warmth. Nabatum lowers himself beside him slowly. For a long time, neither speaks. Then, do you know why scribes frighten kings? The old priest asks. Ilushu shakes his head. Because memory survives floods better than walls. Below them, smoke rises from scattered rooftop fires, where survivors try drying soaked grain. Somewhere in the darkened city, someone begins singing softly. Not a hymn, not a prayer, just an old river song mothers use for frightened children. Others slowly join in, The sound drifts upward through the ruined streets. Thin, human, persistent. Ilushu looks toward the flooded archives below. So much is gone. Nabatum closes his eyes briefly. Yes, he says, which means the survivors will decide what the city remembers. Night settles heavily over Uruk. The river finally begins receding sometime before dawn. Not mercy, only movement. Mud coats the streets in thick brown layers. Broken beams jut from the water like bones. Somewhere beneath the ruined archive chambers, thousands of dissolved names drift quietly back into earth, and beneath his robe, pressed against his chest, Ilushu carries one forbidden memory the flood refused to erase. Chapter 8. Enmerkar's Boast. The feast begins 3 nights after the floodwaters retreat. Too soon, everyone agrees privately. But cities recover through performance long before they recover in truth. So the lamps are lit. The musicians are called. The king orders wine brought up from the dry northern storerooms. And for one evening, Uruk pretends it still believes in itself completely. The great hall smells of wet wool, smoke, and spilled date wine. Workers repaired the roof hastily that morning, but rainwater still drips through cracks into bronze bowls placed discreetly between the tables. Every few moments, someone kicks mud beneath a bench to hide it. Nothing is fully repaired. Everything is arranged to appear repaired. Ilushu sits near the rear wall among the lesser scribes, stylus balanced over fresh clay. His robes still carry the smell of floodwater. Most of the city does. At the center of the hall, King Lugal-Ain raises a dark stone cup toward the gathered nobles and priests. "My people," he begins. "Not citizens, not subjects. My people." That choice matters. The room stills politely. Outside, hammers continue echoing from the damaged southern walls. Inside, musicians pluck carefully at lyres, while servants carry trays of barley bread and river fish through the crowded hall. The fish tastes faintly of mud. No one mentions it. Lugal-Ain begins telling the story of the flood. Not the real one, the useful one. He speaks of decisive leadership, of temple unity, of how the gods favored Uruk above all rival cities. Each retelling smooths away panic and sharpens courage. By the second cup of wine, he claims the river stopped rising immediately after the temple prayers. Several priests nod along despite knowing otherwise. That interests Ilushu. Not the lie itself, the willingness, the hunger for a cleaner version of events. The king's voice grows stronger as the story continues. Soon he speaks of earlier victories too. Battles against rival kings. Trade routes secured by divine favor. Dreams sent personally from Inanna herself. Every triumph expands slightly in the retelling. Enemies grow larger. Victories grow narrower. The gods grow louder. Reality bends gently around authority, like reeds around current. Beside Ilushu, another scribe mutters quietly while scratching corrections into his own tablet. Last year, the king said there were 5 enemy chariots. How many tonight? Ilushu whispers. 15. Neither man laughs. At the far end of the hall, Nabatum drinks silently beside the temple musicians. The old priest watches the feast with tired eyes. Not angry, not surprised, only old enough to recognize repetition. Near the fire pit, a singer begins an older story. The tale of Enmerkar, legendary king of Uruk, builder of walls, speaker with gods, conqueror of distant lands. The audience straightens slightly as the song rises through the smoky hall. Everyone knows this story. That is why it works. The singer's voice weaves carefully between myth and memory until the dead king and the living one begin sharing shadows. Enmerkar held back floods. Enmerkar humbled rival cities. Enmerkar spoke, and the gods answered. Across the hall, Lugal Amni sits taller with every verse. That is the real purpose of history. Ilushu realizes suddenly. Not preservation. Permission. The dead teaching the living how to imagine themselves eternal. A servant trips nearby. Wine spills across the floor. For a moment, everyone freezes. Then laughter breaks through the hall unexpectedly. Real laughter this time. Tired, relieved, human. Even the king smiles. The spell weakens slightly after that. People begin speaking more honestly. Once enough, wine passes between hands. Merchants whisper about rising grain prices. Guards complain quietly about repairing flood damage without enough workers. A priest confesses he no longer understands the omens. Near midnight, the hall grows colder. The lamps burn lower. Smoke gathers thickly beneath the ceiling beams. And still the king keeps talking. Ilushu notices something unsettling then. Lugal Ain is no longer telling the story for the crowd. He is telling it for himself. Each repeated victory sounds less like pride and more like reassurance, as though speaking survival aloud might make it permanent. At last, the king pauses. Silence settles softly through the hall. Beyond the walls, wind moves through the reeds beside the river. Lugal stares into his empty wine cup for several long seconds before speaking again. Do you know what frightens kings most? He asks suddenly. Nobody answers. The king smiles faintly. Being forgotten. The room remains quiet afterward, because everyone understands. Not only kings, priests, scribes, cities, gods. All of them fear the same thing. Ilushu presses his stylus slowly into wet clay. Careful, deliberate, leaving behind marks that may someday outlive everyone in the room. Outside, Uruk breathes beneath torchlight and damaged walls. Half repaired, half imagined, still telling stories against the dark. Chapter 9. Inanna's Night. The city does not sleep on the night of Inanna's festival. It only grows quieter. Doors close earlier than usual. Lamps burn behind woven curtains. Voices lower themselves instinctively as darkness settles over Uruk. Even the river seems to move more carefully tonight. Ilushu crosses the upper courtyard beneath a pale moon carrying a tray of incense bowls toward the temple shrine. The stone beneath his sandals still holds traces of dried flood mud in its cracks. Nothing has fully returned to normal. Perhaps nothing ever will. The air smells of burnt resin and approaching rain. Sharp, sweet, almost medicinal. At the center of the courtyard, priestesses kneel beside shallow bronze mirrors, painting dark lines around their eyes, using soot mixed with copper dust. Their hands tremble slightly, not from fear alone. They have eaten little for days preparing for the ritual. Fasting sharpens visions, the priests claim, or weakens the body enough to mistake exhaustion for revelation. No one says that part aloud. One priestess glances up as Ilushu passes. "You write the temple records, don't you?" "Yes." "Then write gently tonight." Before he can answer, she lowers her eyes again. Drums begin sounding somewhere beyond the outer walls. Slow, steady, like a second heartbeat spreading through the city. The festival of Inanna always unsettles Uruk. Other gods demand obedience. Inanna demands surrender, to love, to war, to grief, to desire, to whatever waits beneath self-control. The priests explain it differently each year. No explanation ever sounds complete. By midnight, the courtyard fills with smoke. Resin burns thickly in hanging bowls while dancers move barefoot across the flagstones in long, slow circles. Gold beads woven into their veils catch moonlight through the haze, turning every movement uncertain at the edges. Nothing appears entirely real anymore. That is intentional. A woman near the entrance drops a clay cup. It shatters loudly against the stone. Several people flinch. Nobody bends to clean it. The music continues. Ilushu stands near the archive stairs, recording offerings as they arrive. Honey, wine, dyed cloth. Small carved figures wrapped carefully in linen. And occasionally stranger things. A lock of hair. A bloodied bracelet. A sealed letter with no name attached. People ask different things of Inanna than they ask of other gods. Not safety. Not order. Permission. The dancers begin singing softly now. The melody folds back into itself endlessly. Verses repeating until the words lose ordinary meaning. Some people close their eyes while listening. Others stare too intently into the smoke. Nearby, a young priest suddenly stumbles backward. Several attendants rush toward him, but he only laughs weakly while gripping the edge of a pillar. The air tastes like metal, he whispers. No one answers. Nabatum appears beside Ilushu quietly. You should leave before the deeper rites begin. Why? The old priest studies the smoke drifting across the courtyard. Because not every ritual improves when witnessed clearly. Yes, that answer feels honest enough to trust. But Ilushu stays. Curiosity has always been stronger in him than caution. The drums grow louder. The dancers move faster now, bare feet striking stone in uneven rhythms. Resin smoke thickens until faces become difficult to distinguish from one another. Then something changes. Not visibly, not dramatically, only a feeling. A pressure settling across the courtyard. Several people lower themselves to the ground instinctively. Others begin crying without understanding why. A priestess standing near the altar suddenly freezes mid-step, eyes fixed on something above the crowd. Ilushu follows her gaze upward. There is nothing there. Only smoke, moonlight, darkness. And yet, for one impossible moment, the entire courtyard feels occupied by something vast enough to make language seem small. No voice speaks. No miracle appears. Still, nobody present will fully agree afterward on what happened next. One woman later swears she heard her dead mother singing. A guard claims the temple statues moved. Another priest insists the moon itself changed color. Ilushu remembers only the overwhelming certainty that everyone in the courtyard felt seen. Completely. Uncomfortably. Seen. Then the moment passes. Like waking suddenly from a dream already fading. The drums slow. The dancers collapse breathless against the temple walls. Some people laugh shakily. Others refuse to speak at all. Near the altar, one priestess kneels trembling with tears running silently down her face. No one asks what she saw. The city understands there are experiences safer left untranslated. By dawn, the courtyard looks ordinary again. Broken cups, cold incense ash, wine stains drying across stone. Temple servants sweep quietly, while exhausted priestesses wash soot from their faces beside the cistern. One complains softly about blisters. Another asks whether any bread remains. The return to normality feels almost absurd. Ilushu kneels near the shattered cup from earlier. One fragment still reflects the pale morning light. Behind him, Nabatum speaks without turning. People think the gods arrive like storms. Ilushu looks toward the fading smoke above the courtyard. How do they arrive then? The old priest watches dawn spread slowly over Uruk. Like memories, he says. Suddenly, and all at once. Beyond the temple walls, merchants begin reopening the market. The river keeps moving. The city resumes itself. But all across Uruk, people carry something quiet away from the night festival. Something they will spend the rest of their lives trying not to describe incorrectly. Chapter 10. The hidden tablet. Before dawn, the archive rooms belong only to scribes and dust. The temple is quiet at this hour. Even the priests speak softly while passing through the upper corridors, as though afraid to wake the records sleeping inside the walls. Ilushu prefers these hours. The city has not yet started demanding things. No kings asking for cleaner histories. No priests requesting miracles written more convincingly. No merchants arguing over grain counts. Only clay. Only silence. Only memory waiting to harden. A single oil lamp burns beside his work table, filling the narrow archive chamber with the smell of charred flax and warm clay. Moths drift lazily through the light, beating themselves against the bronze lamp dish with tiny dry clicks. Around him, shelves lean beneath the weight of centuries. Flood records, temple laws, tax agreements, births, deaths, wars, prayers. Thousands of voices pressed into mud by hands long turned to dust themselves. And hidden beneath Ilushu's reed mat, the forbidden tablet. He has not looked at it since the flood. Not properly. That frightens him more than the tablet itself. Outside the archive doorway, rain taps softly against the stone courtyard. A good sound for sleeping. A dangerous sound for remembering. Ilushu presses fresh clay flat across his table and begins copying the official account of the recent flood. The king's version. The gods tested Uruk. The temple stood strong. The city remained faithful. Order was preserved. Every line feels polished smooth before it even reaches the clay. Not false exactly, just incomplete. He pauses midway through the third column, then slowly reaches beneath the reed mat. The hidden tablet feels colder than the others. He unwraps it carefully. The old clay is cracked now from dampness, but the wedges remain visible beneath the lamp glow. A record no one ordered. A priestess claiming Inanna wept blood during the black moon. Canal waters rising before any storm appeared. Temple birds vanishing 3 days before the flood. And one final line pressed hurriedly near the bottom edge. The gods are afraid. Ilushu stares at the sentence for a long time. Not because he believes it, because someone else did. That matters. Footsteps approach suddenly outside the archive chamber. He wraps the tablet instantly and shoves it back beneath the mat just as Eridu enters carrying fresh clay under one arm. The older scribe squints at him through the dim light. You look guilty. I look tired. That too. Eridu lowers himself heavily onto a stool nearby, joints cracking loudly. For several moments, only styluses scratching clay fill the room. Then, do you ever wonder, Eridu asks quietly, how much of history survives by accident? Ilushu says nothing. The old scribe continues anyway. A fire destroys one shelf, and suddenly, a king never existed. A flood ruins 3 tablets, and a war becomes a trade dispute. He presses his stylus harder than necessary into wet clay. People think scribes preserve truth. He laughs softly. We preserve whichever version survives mold. The words settle heavily into the room. Ilushu glances unconsciously toward the hidden tablet beneath the mat. Eridu notices. Not the tablet itself, only the glance. The older man studies him carefully. There are dangerous records in this temple, he says. Ilushu keeps writing. So I've heard. No. Eridu leans closer. I mean records dangerous because they are true. A silence follows. Rain continues tapping softly outside. At last, Eridu returns to his own work. Neither man speaks again for a while. The city begins waking slowly beyond the archive walls. Bells ring faintly from the lower market. Somewhere below, bakers shout across the canal roads, while temple servants sweep rainwater from the stairs. Morning arrives. Ordinary, predictable, as if civilizations do not collapse one emission at a time. Ilushu finishes the official flood record shortly after sunrise. He reads the final lines carefully before pressing the temple seal into the wet clay. The gods protected Uruk. The people endured. The city remains favored. Beautiful sentences. Clean sentences. Dead sentences. He sets the tablet aside to dry. Then, after a long hesitation, he reaches beneath the reed mat again. This time, he does not unwrap the hidden record. He simply holds it, feeling the weight of it in both hands. A single forbidden memory, surviving only because one frightened scribe chose not to destroy it. Outside, the rain stops. Sunlight begins spreading slowly across the upper temple stones. Eridu rises stiffly from his stool. Coming. In a moment, the older scribe nods and leaves. Ilushu remains alone beside the lamp for several seconds longer. Then, carefully, deliberately, he hides the tablet again. Not because it is safe, because some truths become more dangerous after surviving. Chapter 11. The gods grow tired. The storm returns 3 nights later. Not rain this time. Only wind. Cold air moves through the temple corridors hard enough to bend lamp flames sideways. Curtains whisper against stone walls. Somewhere high above the city, loose roof tiles knock softly together in uneven rhythms. Nobody in Uruk sleeps deeply anymore. The flood changed that. Ilushu crosses the upper sanctuary, carrying fresh oil for the temple lamps, when he notices something strange. The offerings are beginning to rot untouched. Dates collapse inward with mold. Bread hardens beside the altar stones. Wine turns sour in ceremonial bowls. The gods, it seems, are no longer eating properly. Or perhaps the priests have simply become less convincing. The thought arrives uninvited. Dangerous thoughts usually do. Inside the central hall, statues of the gods rise from the shadows beneath flickering firelight. Enlil stands tallest, rigid, severe. His carved eyes fixed toward the city beyond the temple walls. as though judging something endlessly disappointing. Fresh tablets have been stacked at his feet all week. New laws, new punishments, new restrictions on grain distribution and market trade. As though enough words might still hold the city together. Across from him sits Enki, smaller, lower to the ground. His carved expression still carries the faintest trace of amusement, though dust has gathered thickly across his lap and shoulders. Lord of wisdom, Lord of water, Lord of clever solutions that always become larger problems later. The priests argue constantly now over which god should lead the city through recovery. Enlil demands order. Enki demands adaptation. Inanna demands sacrifice. Every answer creates new fear. Near the altar, two younger priests rehearse a fresh ritual involving 7 reeds arranged in precise patterns around a bronze bowl of canal water. Ilushu watches silently. What does this one do? He asks. The younger priest hesitates. It strengthens the city's spiritual boundaries. How? Another hesitation. Then, the high priest designed it, which is not an answer. Only authority wearing ritual clothing. Thunder rumbles somewhere far beyond the plains. Several priests glance upward instinctively. Fear has made everyone superstitious again, even the practical ones, especially the practical ones. At the rear of the sanctuary, Nabatum kneels alone before a small oil lamp, barely holding its flame against the draft. The old priest looks exhausted, more human than holy. Ilushu lowers himself beside him quietly. You haven't slept. Neither has the city. The answer comes immediately, as though Nabatum has been speaking with insomnia itself. For a while, they sit in silence, listening to the wind move through the temple halls. Then the old priest says something strange. Do you know what frightens priests most? Ilushu thinks carefully. The gods abandoning them? Nabatum shakes his head slowly. The gods changing. That settles heavily between them. Because cities survive by believing divine order is stable, predictable, eternal. But lately the gods seem restless, contradictory, difficult to recognize even in their own temples. The rituals feel. Ilushu begins carefully. Tired? The old priest almost smiles. Yes. Across the hall, a copper bowl suddenly slips from someone's hands and crashes loudly across the stone floor. Everyone flinches. The echo lingers far too long. For a brief moment, the entire sanctuary falls silent. Then conversation resumes too quickly. Forced. People pretending not to notice their own fear. Outside, wind sweeps dust through the temple courtyard in pale spirals. Reeds along the riverbank bend nearly flat beneath the gusts. Somewhere below the upper city, a dog begins barking wildly and does not stop. One priest mutters that Inanna's shrine smelled like burnt honey earlier that evening. Another claims Enlil's statue has begun weeping during council meetings. No one fully believes these stories. That is what makes them spread so quickly. Fear rarely needs certainty. Ilushu studies the statues again beneath the failing lamplight. Something about them feels different now, not weaker, not absent, only burdened, as though immortality itself has become exhausting. The thought reminds him suddenly of the hidden tablet beneath his reed mat downstairs. The gods are afraid. He still does not know whether he believes the sentence, but he understands now why someone wrote it. The city is changing faster than the gods can comfortably govern. New trade roads, new flood patterns, new rival kingdoms, new ways of doubting. Even memory feels unstable now. Perhaps eternity was easier when humans stayed smaller. A sudden gust extinguishes half the sanctuary lamps at once. Darkness rushes across the hall. Several priests gasp softly before attendants hurry to relight them. In the brief blackness between flames, Ilushu experiences a strange certainty. The gods need humans to remember them more than humans need gods to survive. The realization feels dangerous enough to hide immediately. Beside him, Nabatum rises slowly from the floor with aching knees. The city will outlive us, the old priest says quietly. Will it outlive them? Nabatum looks toward the towering statues across the hall. Wind moves through the temple again. Cold, restless, ancient. I don't know anymore. Outside, the river keeps flowing beneath the dark sky, unimpressed by kings, unimpressed by priests, unimpressed by gods growing tired inside their stone sanctuary. Chapter 12. Ash and Echo. Years later, travelers still speak the name Uruk carefully. Not because the city vanished, because it survived. There is something unsettling about ruins that continue breathing. Dawn reaches the old district slowly now. Light spills across collapsed walls and broken canals in pale strips, catching on shattered pottery, half buried in the dust. Reeds grow through cracks where market roads once carried crowded cart toward the river gates. The city is quieter, smaller, but not dead. Nothing truly dies beside a river. Ilushu walks the old market road alone, carrying a wrapped tablet beneath his arm. His beard has gone grey at the edges. His hands ache in cold weather now. He no longer writes for kings. Kings came and went too quickly. Some drowned. Some conquered neighboring cities. Some vanished from records entirely. The tablets survived more reliably than crowns ever did. Around him, morning smoke rises from cook fires built beneath ruined archways. Families live inside sections of collapsed temples now, hanging woven curtains across broken stone to keep out the wind. Children play where scribes once argued over tax records. A woman kneads bread dough against the cracked base of a fallen statue. Life settles naturally into abandoned places. That may be civilization's oldest skill. Near the old canal, a shepherd kneels beside the mud, searching for something glinting beneath the reeds. Find anything valuable? Ilushu asks. The shepherd shrugs. Depends who's asking. He lifts a broken bronze seal ring from the water. A king's mark once. Now only scrap metal. The shepherd tosses it into a sack beside rusted tools and cracked pottery. History becoming ordinary again. The canal still carries water through Uruk, though slowly now. Thin currents drift past ruined walls, carrying straw, ash, and reflections of pale morning sky. The great flood scars remain visible everywhere, if you know where to look. A tilted foundation. Watermarks halfway up old temple stones. Entire streets missing from memory. People stopped rebuilding certain districts years ago. The river won those arguments eventually. Ilushu reaches the old archive quarter shortly after sunrise. Very little remains. Collapsed shelves. Broken kiln stones. Fragments of tablets dissolved back into hardened earth. Thousands of records lost forever beneath layers of mud and silence. And yet, some survived. That is the strange thing. Not the great royal decrees. Not the polished temple histories. The survivors were accidental things. A grain tally used to level a table. A child's writing lesson buried beneath debris. A damaged prayer tablet trapped inside a collapsed wall. History survives through neglect as often as preservation. Ilushu kneels slowly beside the ruined archive entrance, then unwraps the tablet he has carried all these years. The hidden record. The gods are afraid. The wedges are faint now. Water damaged. Edges crumbling. But still readable. Barely. He runs his thumb gently across the old clay. Once, he believed the tablet contained dangerous truth. Now he is less certain. Not because the words were false. Because fear belongs to everyone eventually. Kings fear memory. Priests fear change. Cities fear rivers. Even gods fear being forgotten. Above him, birds settle across the broken temple walls, while morning wind moves softly through the reeds. Across the river, a newer city rises bright beneath fresh plaster and clean stone. New markets, new temples, new gods waiting confidently to become eternal. For now, Ilushu watches smoke rise from the distant rooftops. He wonders how many scribes there are already pressing certainty into wet clay. How many hidden tablets are being buried beneath reed mats tonight. The cycle continues because humans continue recording themselves against oblivion. A child's voice interrupts his thoughts. What does it say? A young girl stands nearby, holding a woven basket filled with onions and river herbs. Ilushu looks down at the ancient tablet in his hands. For a moment, he considers answering honestly. Instead, he smiles faintly. It says, someone wanted to be remembered. The girl seems satisfied by this. Children usually are. She runs off toward the market ruins, while morning light spreads slowly across the old city. Ilushu remains where he is a while longer, listening. The river moves beside Uruk exactly as it always has. Patient, indifferent, endlessly carrying names away while leaving traces behind in the mud. At last, he rises carefully to his feet. The tablet remains in his hands, not hidden anymore, not sacred either, only human. Around him, the ruined city breathes softly beneath the dawn. Ash and echo, memory and silence. And somewhere beyond the reeds, another story is already beginning. There is a playlist on screen now. If you would like to keep drifting through stories like this a little longer. The next episode stays close to unexplained phenomena, psychology, forgotten places. You do not have to choose much. You can simply let the next story play whenever you are ready.